Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3 Iron. Welcome to today's discussion where we are breaking down 6 different builds for the upcoming 3.8 PoE Blight League. We are going to go over one build for each base character type inside Path of Exile. So you've got a wide, diverse range of options if you're anything like me and you're still today, the day that the league drops, considering or debating what your option A, B, C, or D starter build might be. Now, for those of you that are new to the channel, welcome to the channel. You can go ahead, like, subscribe, and ding the bell if you want more notifications about videos and discussions just like this one. If at any point in time you'd like to reference any of the build guides that we are recommending for you today, they will be linked down below in the video description for your further reading and enjoyment. Those of you that are veterans to the channel, welcome back. Big shout out and thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. You all know the drill. There are timestamps placed above my slightly balding forehead, placed for your convenience. So if at any point in time you want to jump ahead to a build that you're really looking forward to seeing, or revisit any of the builds that we've previously referenced or discussion points, you can do so. And of course, those are hot linked as well for you down below in the video description. All that being said, let's jump into our disclaimer as we are waiting and counting down with anticipation the Blight League releasing for us, and we all get into queue. So first off, a couple of quid pro quos, as the genie would say. First off, each of these build guides has a video or will have videos accompanying them within the first day or two of the league showing off 3.8 gameplay. So please go watch the build guide creators to get a preview of the gameplay. The vast majority of builds that I will recommend will include videos in them. So I highly recommend, if you want to see exactly what the gameplay looks like, to go to the build guide itself and view those creators' videos. Secondly, not all of these builds are going to be equally priced. Some of them will no doubt be more expensive than others, and I can already tell you our number one build guide at the end of the video is potentially going to be ridiculously expensive. So, that being said, some of these are going to be more friendly as league starters than others. I do my best to select builds that have shells or outlines that can be built as league starters and then filled out as more and more currency is accrued throughout the league. That being said, sometimes it's tough because in a new economy, each league means that stuff that might have been cheap last league becomes very expensive this league, and something that conversely might have been very expensive last league might actually be cheap this league. So just bear with me as some of the prices in these builds that I recommend are probably going to shift within the first few days of the league. Thirdly, and last disclaimer, if you're unsure about how to go about selecting a build, take a look at yesterday's video featuring 7 tips on selecting a starter build for the league. That will be hot linked for you down below in the video description. Okay, enough disclaimers and previews set aside. Let's get into the builds. Our number 6 build is going to be the Champion Tornado Shot Barrage Impale character. Now, a lot of people are already talking about how Tornado Shot has been nerfed. I primarily, some other people that are notorious for playing Tornado Shot and Magic Find characters every single league have already come out with videos defending and explaining exactly what these changes for Tornado Shot basically mean. Yes, you do end up losing DPS due to a specific bug fix, and yes, you also lose DPS because potentially you're not using a +2 Tornado Shot Helm enchant, you're only using a +1. That being said, well, some of you might be saying, oh, Iron, why on earth would you show this off, and why would it be the first one in the video? Well, because it means that this particular build is going to be a lot cheaper this league, precisely because of that reason. A lot of people are going to see this build as getting nerfed. A lot of the components for this build are therefore going to be much, much easier to access on the market if you're playing in any kind of trade league, whether that's softcore trade league or hardcore trade league. Either way, it's going to be much, much more accessible for a lot of players that maybe haven't gotten to access it in the past. Also, another reason to play this build is it's got great defenses. So those of you that are playing hardcore like me during Blight League, you're going to enjoy this build because the champion has got fantastic defensive abilities built right into the Ascendancy. It's also got strong single target because while it's clearing the map using primarily Tornado Shot, you can switch over to using Barrage, which is a fantastic bossing skill. And then, of course, it takes advantage of Impale, the Impale mechanic, which is massive for getting off several different hits of DPS onto your target when you're taking down bosses. This is going to be an incredibly underrated build, and so I highly, highly recommend that you check this out if you're looking for a cheap, defensive, ranged character to get your league started with. Next off, number 5, we've got the Juggernaut. This is a Herald of Agony hardcore viable summoner Juggernaut. Some of you are going to say, wait a minute, if you're going to play Herald of Agony, hasn't Herald of Agony typically been associated with either Necromancer or Occultists in the past? Yes, it has, which is one of the reasons why this is going to be a particularly viable build for hardcore players this league. Now, those of you that might be wondering, what is it that's the Herald of Agony is all about? It is essentially one ginormous minion that follows you around throughout your quests in Ray class, and it is an incredibly strong minion that scales with levels. This means you've got options for building a Herald of Agony crawler build. You can either go for the new, very exciting +2 levels to minion skill gems ascendancy associated with the Necromancer, or if you'd like to play in a more hardcore environment where you'd like a little bit more survivability rather than damage, you can make that trade-off and play Juggernaut, which of course is what Orion72 does in his Path of Building and in his guide. One of the things that I like about Orion's guide is that he's been playing this since 3.5 and he's kept this build guide up to date. In other words, he's seen how things have changed over time over the course of the last year inside playing this particular build. He's seen multiple different nerfs and multiple changes to Herald of Agony, as well as changes and tweaks to the Juggernaut Ascendancy, and he keeps a very well-written, up-to-date guide associated with it. So it's very easy to follow along. It's very, very safe. If you are a new player, whether you're playing hardcore or softcore, and you've never been able to make it to maps, I would highly encourage you to consider maybe it's because of defenses, and play a defensive Ascendancy like a Juggernaut might actually make it easier for you to progress throughout the entirety of the game. Conversely, as a league starter, it is incredibly cheap to get a Juggernaut off the ground and going farming right away. And of course, Herald of Agony, scaling as a minion and doing most of the work for you, makes it not only safe because of your Ascendancy, but also safe because for the most part, you're outside of harm's ranged playing with the Herald of Agony crawler. Next up is our build number 4, the Pathfinder Scourge Arrow Poison build. Now, Scourge Arrow is a fantastic skill. I am probably going to have 3 to 4 different characters and different ascendancies that I play a Scourge Arrow build on this particular league. The reason why I'm highlighting the Pathfinder is, once again, because Pathfinder is supposedly getting a nerf with all of these changes on the passive tree to the way how flask effectiveness is getting spread out. That being said, a lot of people are going to look at Pathfinder and think, oh, well, it got nerfed or it got changed, etc. Evasion is becoming more and more friendly as you scale up evasion with the changes onto the passive tree, as well as some changes to the way how minion accuracy works. So if you're able to build something that's already pretty tanky and can scale with its evasion, as well as scaling flask effectiveness, which is always a great underrated league start mechanic to take advantage of, then playing a Pathfinder might be an excellent suggestion for you. This particular build has got a long list of pros and cons. The pros, of course, it's got great single target. Scourge Arrow is such a DPS workhorse, both for single target as well as for clear. Yes, it's technically a channeling skill, but it does not feel like a channeling skill like any of the other channeling skills that you'll have in Path of Exile. Because it's got a breakpoint or a release point for its damage, it feels more like a true bow build that you have a wind up to and then a releasing of your damage, rather than a channeled skill like, let's say, Cyclone, or let's say something like Lightning Tendrils, or even something like Divine Ire. Yes, there is a channeled section to it, but there is a point in time when you release, and that release point can scale up, and as your damage scales up, you're going to need to channel your skill less and less in order to deliver more and more damage to clear your area. So it really doesn't feel like a channeled build. It's got pretty good clear, and of course, it is going to be very, very tanky. You will not often hear me say this. A hardcore Pathfinder. This is a build that you could play hardcore as a Pathfinder. Again, you won't hear me say that very often because most of the time Pathfinders are just trying to go as fast as they can and necessarily sacrificing defenses for speed. But this particular version is incredibly friendly, cheap, and defensive. And with the buffs and the changes to poison and the way how poisons are interacting, there's lots of different forks that you can go with, lots of different ways in which you can take the outline of this build and scale it up depending on how much currency you are lucky enough to have drop within the first few days, or depending on how you'd like to change your build moving into the future. This is a great outline, great template, and simply a great build overall that's very consistent regardless of your drops. Moving on to our third build for Blight League that's recommended. This is the Sabotuer Flamethrower Trapper. Trappers are incredibly great as League starters because they can take out bosses so easy. You just throw a gazillion traps down, and no matter what map boss it is, they're going to explode as soon as they come out of whatever it is that is their invulnerable phase, because you've laid a whole bunch of traps at their feet, and they all trigger, and they all trigger twice, or they all have a chance to trigger twice. So whatever damage it is that you thought you were doing, it's like, hey, this now gets doubled. It's fantastic. This particular bosser is going to be focused on fire damage for the flamethrower traps. It can do all content. This particular guide builder, the Soul of Black, is fantastic at keeping this thing updated. He already had an update out as soon as patch notes were out with the way how things were changing for the Sabotuer. Now, of course, there are some changes to Sabotuer, and most of the changes and most of the focus of changed gameplay on the Sabotuer is focused on mines. So once again, for a particular starter build, I would highly recommend playing traps. Traps have always been strong. They didn't get nerfed in any way, shape, or form. So if you're maybe a little bit hesitant about trying out a miner for your League starter, but you still want something that is incredibly reliably proven to be a great bossing skill that can be done on the cheap, this is going to be an example of doing that. So, a couple of pros and cons that you might want to consider. First off, in the cons list, physical mitigation is low due to being a dodge-based character, which for many of us that are playing hardcore kind of puts this in a very, very risky scenario. But trappers actually can be very, very hardcore friendly because of the rest of their kit. Because most of the time as a trapper, you are blowing stuff up way that is far away from you, that is at the edge of your screen as opposed to being close to you. So there are trade-offs to this, but I just want to give you guys a heads up. If you are playing hardcore like me in Blight League, it is risky because there's not a whole lot of mitigation or recovery that's built into the Sabotuer. So I wanted to start off with that. Now, some of the pros. You can simply one-shot almost every single boss in the game. You can take out tier 16 Guardians, no problem, pushing your all the way up to your end game bosses with pretty much starter end gear. The damage really is that good, and the mechanic of having traps thrown down at the feet of bosses is really fantastic. It essentially means that you can hide around a corner, drop a bunch of traps, walk around the corner to activate a boss. The boss then aggroes you, walks over the traps, and boom, away they go. So that is some of the signature gameplay of Sabos. That's very reliable for clearing the Atlas. Our number 2 build that we are showing off today is a Hierophant Energy Shield Armor Stacking Ice Nova based character for the Templar. Now, this particular build guide is fantastic because there's a ton of currency that you can sink into this build, and I mean a ton of currency. So those of you that aren't sure what that buzzword means, that you can sink currency into this build, it means it's expensive. Okay, it's an expensive build. It is probably going to continue to be an expensive build. So you might say, oh, Iron, why would you be recommending this as a League starter? Because this is one of the builds that, depending on where the meta goes within the first 2 or 3 days of the League, this could actually be very, very cheap to get geared early on in a League, because maybe not a lot of players will be playing with either armor stacking, ES stacking, or taking advantage of the various mana buffs that have come along the way. I've seen a bunch of people even arguing that mana has essentially gotten nerfed. No. Mana, especially as the Hierophant is going to use it, has been buffed across the board. So don't expect a lot of people to be competing and playing Hierophant, as it's not going to become meta or something until a bunch of people realize just how freaking strong the Hierophant is already at this point in time as of last patch 3.7, and how much stronger it's going to get in 3.8. Ice Nova, of course, was incredibly strong for farming legions, and Vol Ice Nova was one of the most played builds in Legion League for actually popping the Legion mechanic. I highly expect Ice Nova to take over as a dominant way of interacting with the Blight mechanic, simply because if you've got a lot of minions and monsters all headed towards the central point, the tower defense point, it'll help you if you're able to either stack a bunch of traps or have a massive screen clearing ability like Vol Ice Nova that can simply take out everything with one big press of the button. And this particular build that's put together by Cyrix can do just that. He says 10k ES is easily doable while also having 10k armor to use the new and improved Vol Molten Shell skill, which gives you immunity to all elemental ailments as being an inclusion to the effective stun immunity. For sustain, this build uses Leech, powered by Ghost Reaver. Again, I just want to encourage you all, this is an incredibly, incredibly strong build. Yes, it gets a little bit expensive, at least where we are right now in the economics of Path of Exile, but if you can get this thing off the ground within the first day or two, this build is going to carry you as far as the amount of currency that you're able to make can carry you. Time for our number one build of this particular league that you are going to hear me talk about, complain about, rant about, rave about. It is going to be anything having to do with either Detonate Dead or Volatile Dead combining with the Poet's Pen. Poet's Pen got a slight tweak to it. It got a buff to its cooldown time, but then it changed the way how its attacks are going to actually proc, with spells actually proccing at the end of the attack rather than at the beginning of the attack. So we've yet to see if that's actually going to balance out to not be a nerf or a buff at all. That being said, with all of the changes to the Necromancer Ascendancy, we are 100%, you've heard me say it here throughout the week, we are 100% going to see this undead wagon witch sort of corpse destruction exploding archetype come to the forefront in the meta. We are going to see Poet's Pen prices skyrocket. Those of you that are new to Path of Exile, unfortunately for you, you are no longer going to see the days of Poet's Pens being 1 chaos dropping. These things are going to be anywhere between probably 20 to 50 C within the first weekend, and already worth a couple of X probably by late next week. Poet's Pen is an absolutely wonderful build enabling unique that sees the most pack, the most pull for its punches, the most pack for its punches, the most punishment, there we go, for its punches, when you combine it with multiple skills that are taking advantage of the ability to be triggered rather than to be self-cast. So there's this really, really clunky way of going about making Volatile Dead or Detonate Dead work, which is that you self-cast Desecrate, and then you're going to have to self-cast Detonate Dead or Volatile Dead over top of that. There's some other components that you're also going to want in there, like Body Swap in order to jump around and leap around to different corpses that you make as your movement skill. Well, with the buffs and the changes to Body Swap, with the buffs and the changes to Desecrate no longer having a cooldown, and with the buffs and changes simply that are going into effect for the Poet's Pen, as well as to, of course, the Necromancer Ascendancy, with all of this chill and shock effect for corpses, as well as life onto corpses that you've spawned, this means that Detonate Dead and Volatile Dead will go up in massive, massive viability, both as map clearing skills as well as bossing skills. Now, of course, Volatile Dead is a homing beacon, so you can almost think of it like SRS as an ability by which, once summoned, it will go and find enemies for you. This means if you're in Delve, as you are going from point to point, if there's enemies that are hiding or enemies that you can't get to on the path, or that you're simply fast enough to get by, the Volatile Dead will go find those enemies out for you. It's really, really nice. It essentially gives you a guidepost of where it is that enemies are going to come from if you're worried about getting one shot in a Delve. It also simply means that any stragglers that you didn't literally go out of your way to go and attack, it's going to go take care of those for you. Volatile Dead is such a quality of life ability. When I first started playing Path of Exile, somebody turned me on to playing SRS because I wanted to play something that had homing abilities that would take advantage of the fact that I suck as a player in almost every video game, mechanically speaking. I am simply a terrible mechanical player. So I didn't want to have to aim anything. So one of my good buddies, Beckett, turned me on to SRS because it was a homing skill that would seek out enemies regardless of where they were on the screen. Well, Volatile Dead is an even better version of that scales with corpses. And now we've got an entire ascendancy that is built around corpses. So you can play this particular build either as a Necromancer or as an Ascendant. There's a couple of different build guides that will be associated with this down in the video description that you can check out. Both of these are theoretical, and I put air quotes around this, theoretical at the moment because we haven't gotten to play with the new Necromancer Ascendancy, and it has changed drastically. Corpses have been changed, and the way how the Necromancer is going to take advantage of and use corpses has changed dramatically, such to the effect that there is this whole new Wagon Witch archetype that this same exact build with these same exact items, Comb's Heart, Poet's Pen, potentially Indigan, Dying Sun, Wise Oak, along with Comb's Roots, all of these particular build components used to be played on either Pathfinder or you could play it on Elementalist in the past, but now it is going to be played out on either an Ascendant or on the Necromancer because of all of the corpses that you are going to take advantage of. Remember that corpses are both those dead things which you summon via Desecrate, but also as you kill stuff, potentially there will be corpses all around you. So essentially anything that activates or triggers off of corpses, you can either start your map out with simply by activating your Poet's Pen abilities, or as you kill more stuff on the map, you're going to snowball because there are corpses around you all the time. So there's lots and lots of different mechanics that are going to be playing off of one another layered. I particularly like Igor's particular build guide. Right now that's mostly theoretical. He's got no videos for it because he's simply picking up the Corpsemancer Volatile Dead archetype right now and building into it. But I particularly like his build because he's got an itemization breakdown of how to build out your particular build, giving you priorities of what you should be looking for with cheap, moderate, or expensive gear. And then, of course, I like Marcus's build because it takes advantage of playing the Scion, and it's got a history to it that shows you, dating all the way back to Synthesis, exactly how you would play this particular build. So if you're looking for videos of what it looks like to be warping around a map using body swap while also desecrating bodies, while also blowing up bodies, while also homing into enemies, all while you're holding down a single button and maybe smashing some flasks every once in a while, I would highly recommend you go and check out his videos. So those are our 6 or really 7-ish builds that we are recommending for you today to start the Blight League. Of course, Blight League drops today, so we are all hyped and excited and waiting for the countdown. Leave us a comment down below. What are you going to League start during the upcoming Blight League with? And of course, what builds are you most looking forward to trying out during Blight League? And lastly, what ascendancy do you believe will be the most popular in Blight League? I was actually reviewing a video the other day about previous league predictions for the Legion League, and I was so blown away. I said that Raider Cyclone would be meta. I was totally wrong about the Raider aspect of it, but was totally right on it about Cyclone taking over the meta for all of Legion League. So I'd love to hear your particular predictions, so that way you can look back in time and say, hey, I was totally right, or hey, I was totally wrong about the Path of Exile 3.8 Blight League expansion. I myself am going to League start with a Juggernaut. I'll either transition it into a Herald of Agony Summoner or into a Zombie Mancer. That is a build that I have previewed previously this week and taken a look at, the strength stacking Zombie Mancer Juggernaut. What builds am I looking forward to playing most? I am, of course, going to be playing multiple different versions of the Necromancer Ascendancy. I'll be playing hardcore in Blight League, so it'll give me plenty of deaths and plenty of opportunities to be trying out different builds as I am leveling in hardcore Blight League. And of course, I believe the popular ascendancies that are actually going to come up during Blight League, yes, I believe Necromancer is going to be right up there at the top, but I actually believe Assassin is going to be all over the place because of Elusive and Mistwalker. It's one of the reasons why I actually didn't include an Assassin in this particular build guide. I think there's going to be a gazillion builds out there that can be played as an Assassin. I think they're mostly going to be softcore oriented, not necessarily great as League starters, because everybody and their brother is going to be trying to play an Assassin build. So word of advice and word of warning, if you want to make a bunch of currency, sell stuff to Assassin players. If you want like the most expensive builds of the league, it's probably going to be Assassins and Necros. Those are my thoughts. Those are my predictions. Those are the builds that I'm looking forward to playing. But how about you? Drop us a comment down below, and I look forward to interacting with each and every one of you in our discussion. And of course, I hope that today, even today, the first day of the league and this first opening weekend of Blight League is when a Mirror of Calandra drops for the both of us.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.